There is a quiet kind of childhood that does not look broken from the outside. No obvious chaos, no dramatic collapse. Just a child who learned, very early, how to be composed, how to listen, how to manage emotions that were not theirs to carry. They were praised for being mature, for being responsible, for understanding more than other kids. But what often goes unseen is what was traded in exchange for that maturity. Because growing up too fast is not the same as growing up strong. Sometimes it is the result of absence, emotional, physical, or psychological. Sometimes it is adaptation disguised as character. This is the psychology of a child who learned to become an adult before they were ready, not because they wanted to, but because something in their environment required it. And long after childhood ends, the nervous system remembers. There is often no single moment when a child realizes they are no longer allowed to be just a child. No announcement, no clear line crossed. Instead, it happens quietly, through small recognitions that accumulate over time. The child notices that adults around them are overwhelmed, tired, preoccupied, emotionally absent, or emotionally fragile. They sense that their own needs arrive at the wrong moment, that asking questions creates tension, that expressing fear adds weight to an already heavy room. So they begin to adjust. They learn when to stay quiet, when to be helpful, when to be agreeable. This is not manipulation, it is attunement. A child who grows up too fast is often a child who learned to read the emotional weather early. They noticed shifts in tone, changes in energy, the unspoken rules of what was allowed and what was not. And because children are wired for connection, they adapt instinctively. If being easy keeps peace, they become easy. If being capable earns approval, they become capable. If being strong prevents collapse, they become strong. In these environments, play does not disappear dramatically, it simply becomes less prioritized. The child may still laugh, still imagine, still dream, but always with one eye open, always aware, always prepared to step in if something goes wrong. They learn responsibility before they learn rest. Sometimes this looks like parentification, becoming an emotional confidant, a mediator, a caretaker. Other times it is more subtle. The child becomes the good one, the one who doesn't cause trouble, the one who understands without explanation. Adults often praise this behavior. They call the child mature, old soul, wise beyond their years. What is rarely asked is why a child needed to become that way in the first place. Growing up too fast is not about intelligence, it is about environment, about what was required to stay connected, to stay safe, to stay seen. The child did not choose maturity because it felt good, they chose it because it worked. And it works remarkably well. The child becomes dependable, self-sufficient, emotionally restrained. They learn how to manage themselves without guidance, how to soothe without comfort, how to solve problems without asking for help. But something important is quietly interrupted. The developmental space where emotions are explored freely, where mistakes are allowed without consequence, where care is assumed, not earned. Instead, the child internalizes a different rule. My needs must be managed carefully. They may still need comfort, still crave reassurance, still want protection, but they learn that these desires are inconvenient, so they minimize them, rationalize them, push them aside. This is where innocence shortens, not because the child loses goodness, but because they lose permission. Permission to be messy, to be unsure, to be held without explanation. Psychologically, this early shift creates a subtle split. One part of the child remains sensitive, observant, emotionally rich. Another part steps forward to manage, contain, and perform. Over time, the managing part becomes dominant, not because it is healthier, but because it is safer. And safety in childhood always comes first. This is why children who grow up too fast often appear calm in situations that would overwhelm others. Their nervous systems learned early how to suppress reaction in favor of stability. They became skilled at holding tension quietly. What they did not learn, because the environment did not allow it, was how to release it. So the tension stays. It settles into the body, into posture, into breathing, into the way they relate to responsibility and rest. By the time childhood ends, the adaptation feels normal. The child may not even recognize what was lost. There was no comparison point. This was simply how things were done. But the body remembers. It remembers the moments when comfort was delayed, when reassurance was conditional, when being easy felt safer than being honest. And long before the person understands this cognitively, something inside them knows childhood ended early. Not because time moved faster, but because the space to be young became too small. Children do not grow up too fast in environments that feel consistently safe. Early maturity is not a personality trait, it is a response. It forms in spaces where emotional stability is uncertain, where support is inconsistent, or where the child senses that someone else's needs carry more urgency than their own. These environments do not have to be extreme or visibly chaotic. Often they appear ordinary from the outside. A household can function. Routines can exist. Care can be present. And still, a child can learn that emotional room is limited. In some families, adults are overwhelmed with stress, illness, grief, or unresolved trauma. They may be physically present, but emotionally unavailable. In others, emotions are unpredictable, warm one moment, withdrawn the next. The child never quite knows which version of connection they will encounter. Uncertainty becomes the teacher. When care is inconsistent, the nervous system adapts by staying alert. The child learns to monitor tone, mood, and timing. They become skilled at anticipating shifts before they happen. This vigilance is not conscious, it is biological. The body learns that connection requires awareness. In other cases, emotional expression itself is discouraged. Sadness is minimized, fear is dismissed, anger is punished or shamed. The message is subtle but persistent. Some feelings create discomfort in others. So the child edits themselves. They keep distress small. They offer competence instead of vulnerability. They replace need with usefulness. This is often mistaken for resilience, but resilience implies recovery. What forms here is endurance. A child who grows up too fast is often praised for being independent. But independence in these contexts is rarely chosen, it is required. Asking for help either leads nowhere or creates tension, so the child stops asking. They learn to handle things alone, not because they want to, but because it is more efficient. Psychologically, this creates a specific attachment pattern. The child learns that closeness is conditional, that safety depends on self-regulation rather than co-regulation, that being low maintenance preserves connection. And so, they become low maintenance. They may also become deeply empathetic, attuned, emotionally perceptive, not because these qualities were nurtured, but because they were necessary. Reading others accurately helps prevent rupture. It keeps the system stable. This is why children who grew up too fast often feel older than their peers, not in knowledge, but in responsibility. They carry an internal sense that something important depends on them. Sometimes that something is emotional harmony. Sometimes it is a parent's well-being. Sometimes it is the avoidance of conflict. The child becomes a quiet stabilizer. But this stability comes at a cost. The child's own emotional development becomes compressed. There is little room to experiment with feelings that do not serve the environment. There is little tolerance for confusion, dependency, or messiness. Over time, the child internalizes the belief that maturity equals worth, that being composed equals being lovable, that managing oneself equals being safe. This belief does not feel imposed, it feels logical, it works. And because it works, it solidifies. By adolescence, the pattern is often fully formed. The person may struggle to identify their needs without guilt. They may feel uncomfortable receiving care. They may feel uneasy when others take responsibility for them. Rest can feel unfamiliar. Being taken care of can feel undeserved. The roots of early maturity are not found in ambition or intelligence. They are found in adaptation, in the quiet calculations a child makes about what is required to belong. This is why healing later in life often begins with grief, not for what happened, but for what didn't. The comfort that was missed, the protection that was inconsistent, the emotional permission that never arrived. Understanding these roots is not about blame, it is about context. The child did not fail to be a child. The environment failed to hold one. And so the child grew, quickly, carefully, and alone. When a child grows up too fast, the change does not live only in memory, it lives in the nervous system. Psychologically, early responsibility reshapes how the brain understands safety, connection, and selfhood. What begins as adaptation slowly becomes identity. The child does not simply do maturity, they become it. At the core of this process is regulation. In healthy development, a child learns emotional regulation through relationship. Distress is met, feelings are named, calm is borrowed from a steady adult nervous system. Over time, the child internalizes this process and learns to self-regulate. But when emotional support is inconsistent or unavailable, co-regulation does not occur reliably. The child is left to manage intense states alone, and so the psyche chooses the most efficient solution available: suppression, control, and premature self-sufficiency. This is not emotional intelligence, it is emotional containment. The nervous system learns that strong feelings create instability, that dependency invites disappointment, that vulnerability risks overwhelm. So emotions are managed internally, often without language or release. This is why children who grew up too fast often appear calm under pressure. They have practiced staying composed during emotional uncertainty. But this composure is not ease, it is restraint. Psychologically, this often aligns with avoidant or disorganized attachment patterns. Intimacy is desired, but it activates tension. Closeness feels meaningful, yet unsafe. The system does not trust that care will remain steady once it is needed. So the child, and later the adult, learns to keep emotional distance even while being present. They may listen deeply, without sharing much. They may support others without asking for support. They may appear strong while feeling quietly depleted. Internally, there is often a split. One part of the psyche holds longing for rest, softness, and being held emotionally. Another part holds vigilance, the belief that letting go will lead to loss of control. These parts are not in conflict because one is wrong. They are in conflict because they were shaped under pressure. Early maturity also impacts identity formation. When responsibility arrives too soon, the self is built around function rather than desire. The child becomes who they are needed to be, not who they are curious to become. Over time, this creates a subtle disconnection from personal preference. The adult may struggle to answer simple questions. What do you want? What feels good to you? What do you need right now? Not because the answers do not exist, but because attention was trained outward for so long. There is also often a heightened sensitivity to others' emotions. The early matured child learned to scan environments for cues. This attunement remains active in adulthood. They notice shifts others miss. They feel tension quickly. They sense unspoken needs. This can look like empathy, but empathy without boundaries becomes burden. The psyche associates care with responsibility. Being close means managing. Loving means holding things together. And so relationships can feel heavy, even when they are meaningful. Emotionally, many adults who grew up too fast experience a delayed grief. Grief for the childhood that was abbreviated, for the innocence that was bypassed, for the freedom to be dependent without consequence. This grief does not always arrive as sadness. Sometimes it appears as numbness, as exhaustion, as irritation at small demands, as a deep weariness that has no obvious source. The mind may label this as burnout or introversion, but beneath it is often a system that has been regulating alone for too long. The psychology of early responsibility is not about damage, it is about pattern, about a system that learned to survive efficiently, but not gently. Understanding this allows a shift, not toward blaming the past, but toward recognizing why rest feels difficult, why receiving care feels awkward, why slowing down feels unsafe. The child who grew up too fast did not lose the ability to feel. They learned to delay it. And healing does not require undoing strength. It requires adding permission. Permission to need, permission to pause, permission to be held without performing. The psyche does not forget how to be a child. It simply waits for safety to return. The adult who grew up too fast often carries two opposing truths at once. They are capable and they are tired. They are composed and they are overwhelmed. This tension does not come from weakness. It comes from a life spent being stronger than the moment required. Internally, there's a constant negotiation between parts of the self. One part knows how to manage, adapt, and endure. This part is efficient, reliable, often admired. It steps forward automatically in moments of stress. It knows how to hold space when no one else can. But there is another part, quieter, less visible, that holds unmet needs. This part longs for rest without justification, for care that does not have to be earned, for connection that does not come with responsibility attached. These two parts coexist, and they are rarely in agreement. When life becomes demanding, the managing part takes control. It suppresses fatigue. It overrides emotion. It tells the system to keep going. This strategy once protected survival, so it still feels necessary. But over time, the cost accumulates. The adult may begin to feel irritable without knowing why, disconnected during moments that should feel meaningful, drained by relationships that are not objectively demanding. There may be guilt around this exhaustion. After all, nothing is wrong. This is the inner conflict. The psyche is torn between loyalty to an old survival pattern and a growing awareness that the pattern is no longer sustainable. Closeness becomes complicated. The adult wants intimacy, but intimacy activates pressure. Being needed feels familiar, but also heavy. They may unconsciously choose roles where they are the listener, the helper, the steady one, not because they enjoy it, but because it feels known. And when someone offers care in return, discomfort can arise. Receiving help may feel awkward, unnecessary, even threatening, not because support is unwanted, but because dependency was once unsafe. The nervous system learned that needing others meant disappointment or loss of control. So the adult oscillates. They move toward connection, then retreat. They open up, then close down. They crave understanding, yet struggle to let themselves be known. This push and pull is exhausting. It can lead to self-judgment. The adult may label themselves as avoidant, emotionally unavailable, or broken. They may wonder why relationships feel harder for them than for others. But the truth is quieter and more compassionate. The conflict is not about incapacity, it is about conditioning. The early matured adult learned to associate worth with usefulness. Being valuable meant being steady. Being loved meant being low maintenance. Over time, this belief embeds itself deeply. So when the adult feels overwhelmed, they often do not ask for support. They withdraw. They handle things alone. They may disappear emotionally or physically, not to punish others, but to protect what little energy remains. This withdrawal can be misunderstood. From the outside, it may look like detachment. From the inside, it feels like survival. There is also often anger beneath the surface. Not loud anger, but quiet resentment. A sense of having carried too much for too long, of having been strong without being seen. This anger can feel frightening. The early matured child learned that strong emotions disrupt stability, so anger is often redirected inward, showing up as self-criticism or emotional numbness. The adult may feel caught. If they stay strong, they lose themselves. If they let go, they fear everything will fall apart. This is the core dilemma. Healing does not begin by choosing one side over the other. It begins by acknowledging that both parts formed for a reason. The managing part protected survival. The longing part protected humanity. Neither is the enemy. Integration begins when the adult stops asking, "Why am I like this?" and starts asking, "What did I learn that made this necessary?" This shift creates space. Space to recognize that exhaustion is not failure, that withdrawal is not cruelty, that difficulty receiving care is not arrogance, it's history. The early matured adult does not need to become softer by force. They need safety, consistency, experiences where support is offered without strings attached. Slowly, the nervous system can learn something new, that rest does not equal collapse, that vulnerability does not guarantee loss, that being held does not require performance. The conflict does not disappear overnight, but it begins to soften. The adult learns to listen to their limits before resentment builds, to pause before depletion becomes withdrawal. This is not regression, it is recalibration. The child who grew up too fast learned to survive alone. The adult is learning that survival no longer requires isolation. And in that learning, something gentle begins to unfold. The turning point rarely arrives as a breakthrough. There's no dramatic realization, no moment where everything suddenly makes sense. It arrives quietly, often in exhaustion. For the adult who grew up too fast, this moment comes when the old ways of coping no longer work as smoothly as they once did. The strength that once carried them begins to feel heavy. The ability to endure starts to feel like a burden rather than a skill. Something begins to crack, not in a destructive way, but in an honest one. They may notice how tired they are after being fine, how depleted they feel after being reliable, how invisible their own needs have become, even to themselves. This is the moment when endurance stops feeling noble. Instead of asking, "How can I handle more?" a different question emerges. Why do I always have to? This question is subtle, but it changes everything. Awareness begins to replace autopilot. The adult starts noticing patterns that once felt normal, how they anticipate others' emotions before their own, how they stay composed even when overwhelmed, how they rarely ask for help unless everything has already fallen apart. These observations are not accusations, they are recognitions. Psychologically, this marks a shift from survival-based functioning to reflective consciousness. The nervous system, having spent years prioritizing stability, finally has enough distance to observe itself. Memories surface differently now, not as isolated hardships, but as a consistent theme, being needed too early, too often, and without choice. Holding responsibility before having language for boundaries, learning to be dependable before learning to be protected. This realization can bring grief, not the sharp grief of loss, but the slow grief of recognition. A mourning for the childhood that was abbreviated, for the innocence that was bypassed, for the freedom to be dependent without consequence. This grief does not always arrive as sadness. Sometimes it appears as numbness. They are signs of recalibration. The nervous system is learning that safety does not have to come from overfunctioning, that worth is not earned through sacrifice, that presence does not require self-erasure. This learning is fragile at first. Old patterns resurface easily under stress. The adult may slip back into managing, fixing, enduring, but now something is different. They notice. They feel the cost sooner. They recognize the tension earlier. They hear the quiet signal before burnout forces withdrawal. This awareness creates choice. Not perfect choice, but possibility. The adult begins to imagine a different way of being, one where responsibility is shared, where rest is allowed, where care is reciprocal. This imagination is not fantasy. It is the nervous system exploring new ground. The turning point is not about changing behavior immediately. It is about changing relationship to self, to history, to capacity. The adult is no longer running from the child who grew up too fast. They are finally turning toward them, listening, acknowledging, allowing. And in that turning, something essential begins to soften. Strength loosens its grip. Control relaxes slightly. Endurance makes room for choice. This is not the end of adaptation. It is the beginning of integration. Healing for the child who grew up too fast does not arrive as correction. It does not ask them to become softer overnight or to abandon the strength that once kept them safe. Healing arrives as integration. Integration is quiet work. It begins when the adult stops trying to eliminate parts of themselves and starts allowing those parts to speak to one another. The competent one, the vigilant one, the tired one, the one who still longs to be held without responsibility. For much of their life, these parts were kept separate. Strength had to dominate. Vulnerability had to stay hidden. Need had to be managed carefully, if acknowledged at all. Integration invites a different relationship. The adult begins to notice when they are stepping into responsibility automatically, before choice. They notice how quickly they say yes, how instinctively they minimize their own fatigue. These observations are not met with criticism, they are met with curiosity. Why does this feel familiar? What is this protecting? What would happen if it paused? Psychologically, this phase involves teaching the nervous system something it never learned early on, that safety can coexist with rest, that closeness does not require vigilance, that being supported does not equal collapse. This learning cannot be rushed. The body does not update through insight alone. It updates through experience. Small moments where the adult allows themselves to receive without immediately compensating. Brief interactions where boundaries are honored. Situations where saying no does not result in abandonment. These moments may feel uncomfortable at first. There is often anxiety when not performing strength, a subtle fear that if responsibility is released, something will go wrong. This fear makes sense. For a long time, responsibility was the only guarantee of stability. Healing does not argue with this fear, it acknowledges it. The adult learns to reassure the nervous system not with force, but with consistency, by staying present through discomfort, by noticing that rest does not lead to chaos, that connection can survive pauses, that people can remain without being managed. Over time, the meaning of strength begins to change. Strength is no longer defined by endurance alone. It includes discernment. It includes pacing. It includes the ability to stop. The adult begins to trust their internal signals. Fatigue is no longer something to override immediately. Emotional overwhelm becomes information rather than a failure. Withdrawal, when it happens, is shorter, more intentional, less self-punishing. This is not perfection. Old patterns still appear under stress. The difference is that the adult returns to themselves more quickly. They repair sooner. They no longer abandon themselves for long stretches of time. Integration also reshapes relationships. The adult becomes more selective, not because they care less, but because they care more accurately. They notice which connections feel reciprocal and which feel draining, which allow them to be human, not just capable. This selectivity is not selfishness, it is attunement. There may be grief here as well. Some relationships cannot survive this shift. Those built on dependency or one-sided emotional labor may fade. This loss can hurt, even when it is necessary. Healing allows space for this grief without interpreting it as proof of failure. The adult understands something important now. Outgrowing a role is not betrayal, it is evolution. As integration deepens, the inner child who grew up too fast begins to feel less alone, not because someone else has stepped in, but because the adult self has learned to stay. They listen when exhaustion speaks. They pause when resentment appears. They protect rest without justification. This creates an internal sense of safety that was missing before. From this place, connection begins to feel different. It is no longer entered from obligation, but from choice. No longer maintained through endurance, but through mutual presence. Healing does not erase the past, it changes the relationship to it. The child who learned to survive early does not disappear. Their strength remains, but it is no longer the only option. It becomes one tool among many. Alongside it now exists softness, discernment, permission. The adult no longer has to grow up again. They are learning how to arrive. What remains is not the wound, not the loss, not even the years that were carried too early. What remains is the awareness. The adult who once had to become strong before becoming known now moves through the world with a different kind of presence, quieter, more deliberate, less hurried to prove anything. Strength no longer announces itself, it simply exists. There is a tenderness that comes from having seen too much too soon, a sensitivity to shifts in tone, an instinct to notice what is unsaid. This awareness is no longer used only to protect others. It begins to include the self. The child who grew up too fast is not gone. They live in the way the adult listens carefully, in how they anticipate needs, in how they recognize emotional undercurrents long before words appear. But now, there is choice. The adult understands that awareness does not require responsibility, that noticing does not mean fixing, that care does not demand self-erasure. This is a profound shift. For much of life, attention was tied to survival, to safety, to staying ahead of emotional rupture. Now, attention can soften. It can be curious rather than vigilant, present rather than braced. The nervous system begins to rest in moments that once felt unsafe. Silence no longer demands interpretation. Distance does not automatically signal loss. Connection can breathe. There is still grief. Grief for the childhood that never slowed down, for the moments when someone else should have noticed, for the softness that was postponed indefinitely. This grief does not ask to be resolved, it asks to be acknowledged. And when it is, something quiet opens. The adult no longer measures themselves by how much they can carry. They no longer confuse usefulness with worth. They no longer stay past the point of depletion in order to be chosen. What replaces this is not detachment, it is presence. A grounded ability to remain connected without overextending, to care deeply without disappearing, to love without managing. This is not the end of growth, it is the beginning of a different rhythm. A rhythm where rest is not earned, where boundaries are not defenses, where vulnerability is not dangerous, but discerning. The story of the child who grew up too fast does not conclude with repair in the conventional sense. There is no return to innocence, no rewriting of the past, but there is integration. The adult carries the past without being carried by it. They hold the memory without reliving the pressure. They remember the responsibility without repeating it. What remains is a self that no longer has to rush toward maturity or retreat into isolation. They are here, whole enough, aware enough, gentle enough, and for the first time, not ahead of life, but finally inside it.